Welcome to The Making of Britain, the story of how land, law and power shaped an island. In each episode we trace a turning point that changed what Britain was and what it would become. I want to tell you a story. It's the story of a girl called Mary. She lived in 1851. Her father was a carpenter, her mother took in laundry. Mary worked at a cotton mill from the age of 11. She worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. But the strange thing is, despite all those hours, all that work, Mary didn't get to keep her own wages. Not because she was a child, but because she was female. Why? What was it about Britain that said a woman's earnings belonged to someone else? And when did that finally start to change? Let's start with how it all began. When Mary turned 21, she got married to a man named Tom. That was the norm. And like most women at the time, something strange happened after she said her vows. She disappeared. Not literally, of course, but legally. Mary no longer existed as an individual. She became what English common law called femme couverte, a covered woman. Covered, that is, by her husband. That meant she couldn't own property, couldn't open a bank account, couldn't sue or be sued. And every penny she earned belonged by law to her husband. That wasn't a glitch, that was the system. Marriage wasn't just a romantic bond, it was a legal contract that transferred control, and that included labour. So even if Mary went out and cleaned houses, or worked as a seamstress, or kept the books at a family shop, her wages were his wages. Some women found ways around it. They take in sewing and asked to be paid in groceries or coins tucked into the baby's blanket. But under the law, they had no right to keep what they earned. And this wasn't some ancient medieval relic. This was 19th century Britain. Industrial, literate, proud of progress. So why did it take so long to challenge it? Change didn't begin with the revolution, it began with paperwork. In the 1850s and 60s, women began petitioning Parliament. Educated women, often middle class, who had seen the injustice firsthand. One of them was Caroline Norton, a woman whose husband beat her, took her children, and claimed all of her earnings as a writer. She had no legal way to stop him, so she used her pen. Through relentless campaigning, she helped push through the Married Women's Property Act of 1870. For the first time, a married woman could legally keep the wages she'd earned after marriage. Just the wages, not her inheritance, not her house, just the coins she sweated for. It was progress, but limited. And it took until 1882, with the second Married Women's Property Act, for married women to be legally recognised as separate people. Finally, they could own property in their own name. Finally, they could sue and be sued. But this was still just ownership, not opportunity. Women could now keep a wage, but in most cases they still weren't allowed to earn one in the first place. Why? Mary's granddaughter Eleanor was smart. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer. In 1910, she applied to read law at university, but her tutors told her politely that she could study, but not practice, because the law was a public office and public officers were for men. Eleanor was not alone. British law excluded women from a whole range of professions: medicine, law, civil service, even postal work had gender restrictions. The reasoning was usually the same, that women were too emotional, too delicate, or simply too much of a distraction. There were exceptions: nursing, teaching, textile work, but these were seen as natural extensions of womanhood, not careers, and they were paid accordingly. Even when women entered the workforce en masse during the First World War, taking jobs once held by men, they were expected to leave again the moment the war ended. So if women could now legally keep their wages, why weren't they being allowed to earn them fairly? In 1919, Parliament passed the Sex Disqualification Removal Act. A clunky name, but a landmark change. Suddenly, women could become lawyers, sit on juries, and join the civil service. It opened the door, but the steps through were steep. Institutions were reluctant, employees slow to adapt, and the pay gap gigantic. A woman doing the same job as a man might earn half as much, if not less. Why? Because now the law allowed women to work, it didn't guarantee equality. And there was no national minimum wage, no requirement for fair contracts, and no enforcement body to step in. And behind it all was a deeper cultural message that women's primary role was still in the home. It would take decades and several battles ahead to chip away at that idea. What finally changed the tide? It wasn't a politician who made the change. It was a group of sewing machinists in Dagenham. In 1968, women at the Ford plant walked out on strike. They were classified as unskilled, even though their work required real precision. Their male counterparts were paid 15% more. When they complained, they were told it was just how the grading system worked. They went on strike anyway. Their action led directly to the Equal Pay Act of 1970. For the first time in Britain's history, employees were legally required to pay men and women the same wage for the same job. It was a hard-fought victory. And still, there were loopholes. Employees redefined job descriptions, discrimination went underground. Women who challenged it were labelled troublemakers. But something had changed. The law was finally saying what Mary never got to hear, that a woman's labour was her own. Still, laws are one thing, enforcement is another. Today in the UK, the law is clear. Equal pay for equal work, legal protection from discrimination, the right to maternity leave, the right to sue an employer for unfair treatments. But ask any woman and you'll hear the same story. The work isn't done. The gender pay gap still exists, especially in senior roles. Women are overrepresented in low-paid work and underrepresented in the boardroom. Care responsibilities still fall disproportionately on women, limiting their ability to work full-time or climb the ladder. And the legacy of those old laws, the ones that erased women's autonomy, still lingers in subtle ways. It makes you wonder, how different would Britain be if women like Mary had been allowed to keep their wages from the beginning? I think about Mary sometimes, about all the women like her. They worked so hard only to see their labour claimed by someone else, not just by custom, but by the law. And it makes me realise just how deeply the law shapes who we think we are. If you found this story moving, please consider subscribing and share this with someone who might think history is just old names and dates. Because they aren't just stories from the past, they're the foundations of the present. Thank you for walking a little further down the road of Britain's past with me. The story winds on in episodes like this. Until then, take care and I'll see you soon.